Hello everybody, good morning, afternoon and evening. Many thanks for inviting me to be part of this significant global pandemic network webinar series. Thank you to the chair and to my co-presenters. And I'm really sorry not to be with you in person. Let me introduce myself quickly. I'm an urban planner, originally from Northern Ireland, and I live and work in Aotearoa, New Zealand. My experience ranges from local government and academia in the UK and Scotland, and I held the position of Professor of Planning at the University of Auckland and now manage my own consultancy. My brief is to speak to the topic of COVID-19 and sustainable cities, and I've chosen to focus on the Sustainable Development Goals and the New Urban Agenda. And I'll first provide some context about New Zealand and the impact of COVID-19 here. Then I'll go on to focus on what we can do to prepare our cities to address pandemics. And just before I carry on, I'll share briefly just a tiny extract from a video which was created before the lockdown by Visit Auckland, and it tells you a little bit about the New Zealand response.
Stop. Listen, Papatuanuku, the Earth Mother, is breathing. Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, still. Our maranga, our mountains, standing strong. Our moana, our ocean now louder than ever. Tui and our kiriru now need not fight with the daily hum of our busy lifestyles. Our people's waiata, normally loud and joyful, now soft and distant, waiting for the right time to rise again.
I really like the sentiments behind the video, and it helps to show the kind of response that New Zealand has taken. New Zealand has a population of 5 million. Tanada Whenua Indigenous Māori make up 15%. Indigenous Māori have a treaty-based relationship with the British Crown and expect to be involved in decisions which affect their communities. And a good example of this during lockdown has been the creation of the Māori Pandemic Responsiveness Group. New Zealand is what UN Habitat would call a land-rich developed country. Our population density is low by international standards, and our biggest city, Auckland, where I live, has a population of 1.6 million and has been developing at a rate of 1.8% a year. When it comes to COVID-19, our experience is in stark contrast to elsewhere. The figures released earlier today globally are just astounding. As of July the 13th, when the latest figures were available here, we've had 1194 confirmed cases and 22 deaths. I think there was one new case today. The largest clusters have tended to be at gatherings outside major centres. For instance, at an agri conference, a wedding, one at a St. Patrick's Day celebration. Currently, there's no community transmission, and new cases are those returning from overseas, having been tested while in quarantine. So to put the numbers in some perspective, the Republic of Ireland, with a population of just under 5 million, has had almost 25 times the number of cases and 50 times the number of deaths. And Northern Ireland, where I was born and brought up, has a population of 1.8 million and has had 554 deaths. So it can be said that so far New Zealand has positively managed the pandemic threat. We know we've been very fortunate. World Cities Day is 82 days away on October the 5th. And if the trend continues between now and then, we will see an increasing number of deaths from COVID-19 worldwide. And it will have affected every country in the world, directly or indirectly. COVID-19 and cities. In COVID-19, the world is facing an acute disaster, a crisis. However, let's not forget that pandemics have been predicted. COVID-19 is one of a series of global pandemics that have affected the world. We've had pandemics in the past. We will have more pandemics, and this one should help us prepare for the next and the next. Cities are significant. They are where the majority of the world's population live. When cities spread, they spill over into wildlife habitats and create opportunities for the transfer of pathogens. And the recent UNEP report on zoonotics actually highlights this. Cities have had to provide solutions to disasters, whether terrorist attacks, earthquakes, floods and bushfires. We can never prevent an earthquake or volcanic eruption, although if we know where the major areas of risk are, we can choose to avoid them. Whereas COVID-19 is an acute crisis, climate change is chronic, as is biodiversity decline and inequality. And many cities have been trying to mitigate the impact of climate change and help reduce carbon emissions and build resilience. What they haven't been able to do is do it fast enough. Let me look at the stages of a pandemic in relation to cities and see what it tells us. Response, recovery and rebuild. And of course there's preparation, which globally we have been shown to be wanting. When it comes to response, the immediate response to a pandemic is a health response involving detection, containment and treatment of those infected by the disease. We know if cities are well designed and have the basic amenities, the spread of disease can be controlled. The World Economic Forum and others have concluded that cities that are open, transparent, collaborative, and adopt comprehensive responses are far better equipped to manage pandemics than those that are not. In addition, the anecdotal evidence would seem to indicate the countries and cities that have been making progress in the SDGs have more resilience. In Auckland, during what we called the lockdown 4 period, when everyone except essential workers stayed at home, apart from exercise and local area and food shopping, we saw reductions in traffic, in air pollution, in noise levels. We saw homeless people housed, streetscapes adapted, but we did see loneliness increase along with domestic and family violence. Death rates actually fell, and we will find out next year what happened with suicides and with birth rates. This month, Auckland Council issued a briefing on its activities during the lockdown. Top of the list was the distribution of 20,000 food and welfare parcels and free transport for essential workers. We saw the digital divide playing out, and one library staff made 15,000 calls to older people. The government adopted the slogan, "Be kind," and provided daily TV updates, and they provided wage subsidies to companies and to individuals. Following the lockdown in April and May, the country slowly opened up. You could say we have moved into what could be called recovery. A challenge for New Zealand is to manage the opening up to ensure that those travelling to New Zealand and many Kiwis who are returning as of right are safely quarantined. So it is still an anxious time for those managing this logistical operation. Coordination is key between airlines and government agencies and contractors tasked with managing the return. The rebuild phase. The response period inevitably has a health focus. But what about after? After disasters and crises, there's an inevitable call to build back and to build back better. It doesn't necessarily mean bricks and mortars. It means making and thinking about the kind of future we really want. During lockdown, we got a sense of what hyper-local living looks like and feels like, and what some of the issues are for different groups of people, where inequalities accentuated, and especially for families in substandard housing. People can only indulge in panic buying when they have the resources to do so. They can only keep washing their hands if they've got access to clean water and soap. People can only live through lockdown if they feel safe from family violence. Children can be homeschooled and student study if they've got access to space to work, a warm, dry house, and secure, reliable internet and a home computer. And people can enjoy those outdoor activities if they have accessible open space, whether a garden, a terrace, or even a balcony. It's important to see the recovery and rebuild as much more than an economic exercise. If we only see things through an economic lens, we lose sight of and fail to put sufficient emphasis on the social and environmental infrastructure, and those things which don't actually require dollars. And I strongly believe this is where the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda help. These globally agreed goals reflect the social, economic, and environmental pillars of sustainability. And whether you see the 17 SDGs as a wheel, a series of wheels, whether you see biodiversity as a precondition for social and economic development and sustainability, there are three overriding principles. And these are leaving no one behind, safe and inclusive economies, and environmental sustainability. They should not be looked at individually. The SDGs interrelate. The aim of leaving no one behind and eradicating poverty requires reduced inequality and gender equality. The New Urban Agenda was originally framed to accelerate the SDGs and to look at the role of cities. And in a post-COVID-19 setting, it is a framework for constructing strategies organised around the social, the environmental, and the economic pillars. So by using the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda as a framework, we can see the road to recovery and rebuild as a whole community, a whole of society response, not only as an economic response. There are societal and individual responses, there are non-monetary responses, and there are cultural responses to consider. And the recent SDG report made a clear start at pulling some of these together. Planners and designers have a responsibility to work with communities and come up with practical suggestions about what we can do to address the root causes of the various challenges we are facing: pandemics, climate change, biodiversity, and inequality. We need to do this in culturally appropriate and inclusive ways. And we could only do this if everybody works together, shares knowledge and expertise at all levels and in all sectors, and this includes civil society. And in the context of pandemics, the role of planners working alongside other professionals is to locate and design new and existing settlements, which can avoid disasters, chronic and acute, create environments which make an immediate response possible, create environments which facilitate recovery, and is a blueprint for a rebuild where necessary. And we can do this. We can do this by mapping high-risk environments, designing to both reduce the chances and mitigate against the impact of threats. We can design our buildings better. And examples in mass transit, tower block complexes, and office blocks, with contactless entrances and lobbies, toilets and washrooms, temperature screening, self-cleaning surfaces. We can respond to basic needs better: clean, dry shelters, drinking water, water for washing, clean air, access to food and community gardens, access to the Internet of all things. And we can make our basic social and physical infrastructure better. If you like, the antidote to mass transport: local open space to exercise and relax, space to grow food safely, spaces to meet virtually, access to means of communication and information. Cities in the future are more likely to be more cellular, what we call a city of self-contained neighbourhoods and villages where people live and work. And this allows for the ability to lock down discrete areas more easily. The European Basque Declaration or EU New Urban Agenda lists practical steps cities and jurisdictions can take to bring about sustainable urbanisation. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We already have a good basis. We know it's not easy to retrofit cities. It's much easier to design and build from scratch, and many countries are creating new towns and cities for expanding populations, or having to recite existing cities which are under threat. And I'm thinking of Jakarta in Indonesia here. The SDGs and the New Urban Agenda provide a lens for us to assess the decisions that need to be made at every level and across all sectors. This presentation has acknowledged the relevance of the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda to addressing COVID-19 and creating sustainable cities. Urbanist Richard Florida said recently that great cities will survive the coronavirus and they will always bounce back. We still need to ask, what will the bounce back look like? How do we make sure it's sustainable? How do we ensure everyone's involved? The UN Policy Brief 78, entitled Achieving the SDGs Through the COVID-19 Response and Recovery, which came out just last month, stated that pre-pandemic SDG achievements helped mitigate some of the impacts of COVID-19. I look forward to being part of the network and ensuring that academics are involved in a wider discussion. And thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this.